Die natürlichen Grenzen der deutschen Nation, wie die natürlichen Grenzen anderer Nationen, sind die Summe sowohl der Regionen, die die Deutschen besiedelt haben, als auch die Regionen, von denen die Deutschen politisch und historisch-politisch interessiert waren, und die Regionen, die von Natur aus einfacher zu verteidigen sind. Das heißt Berge, Flüsse, Seen und so weiter. Zuerst schauen wir die Weltkarte an. Heutzutage gibt es 4 deutsche Staaten: die Bundesrepublik Deutschland, die Republik Österreich, das Fürstentum Liechtenstein und die Schweizerische Eidgenossenschaft. Also, das alles soll deutsch sein. Oder genauer, welche historisch als Hannover, Schleswig-Holstein, Mecklenburg, Vorpommern, Brandenburg, Sachsen, Thüringen, Hesse, Ruhr, Rheinland, Baden-Württemberg, Bayern, Österreich, Liechtenstein und die Deutschschweiz bekannt waren. Lass uns aber nicht die Regionen mit großen deutschen Siedlungen vergessen, die vor der Flucht und Vertreibung Deutscher aus Mittel- und Osteuropa nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg existierten. Also fügen wir dann Hinterpommern, Ostbrandenburg, Schlesien und Ostpreußen, die heute Polen gehören, und auch das italienische Tirol sowie das tschechische Sudetenland der deutschen Nation zu. Natürlich gehören auch Regionen mit kleinster Vertretung der Deutschen zu dieser deutschen Nation. Für die Regionen Polnisch-Posen, Belgisch-Eupen-Malmedy und Französisch Elsass-Lothringen. Hiermit haben wir die natürlichen Grenzen des Deutschen Reiches erreicht. Well, linguistically, of course. Alright, enough is enough. No more German, because believe it or not, I am not accustomed to speaking the language, let alone writing extensively about borders in it. Besides, translating German is such a drag. Anyhow, one might say, and rightly so, that even the earlier presented is in of itself quite excessive. Alas, we move forth, for so I will, and my authority is absolute here. Now there are rather 3 main ways of going about establishing the natural German nation in Europe, one for each of the 3 Reichs, starting with the first one, the Holy Roman Empire. The name's quite deceptive in English. How is a Roman Empire German after all? But in reality the vast majority of the empire was stationed in linguistically early German areas. Besides, the name for the empire, at least after the late 16th century, became to be Heiliges Römisches Reich der Deutschen Nation, the Holy Roman Realm of the German nation. So it counts. Anyhow, the nation shifted around over the course of its 1000-year history, but let's look to its height in 1200. We'll look at around there, because it was around then that it very clearly held dominion over the city of Rome, giving legitimacy to the Roman name. Firstly, from what we have with the linguistic empire we must crop. Namely, in the east let us return west to the Oder, and from the north let us return southward to the Elbe and Saale rivers. Now given the HRE did control Hinterpommern and Holstein at this point, but this is a tad more natural and little sacrificed in the grand scheme of things. Starting from the east we follow the Oder river down to the Sudeten mountains of Bohemia, which carry us eastward until the modern Czech-Slovakian border. The modern Czech-Slovak border lacks any good natural features, but mind it not. Therefrom we jump to follow the edge of the Alps, along pretty much the Austrian border with Hungary, all the way south to the bulk of the border with Slovenia, where we cut modern lines by crossing over that line which once marked the Italian-Yugoslav border, including the greater region of Trieste, that is, from modern-day Slovenia's and Croatia's east, southward until we reach the Adriatic Sea. There on forth the southern border is rather obvious. The Holy Romans, at varying points in their history, did control most of the Apennine Peninsula of Italy. When combined across the ages, verily it all. So in the spirit of Rome it shall all be with the HRE, stretching the nation down to the Mediterranean. Italian irredentism and the aim of securing Italia, though, does necessitate the acquisition of Sardinia, Corsica as well as Sicily. But again, I do recall at least the former being at varying points under HRE control. As for the western border, well, you might think it wise to draw it with the Alps. The Burgundians, who in the lesser hour were a notable part of the empire, dwelt between the mountain range in the east and the Rhone River in modern-day France in the west. Thus the Rhone River shall serve us in kind. Moving northward from there, let us not carve the border to the east along the Rhone, to modern-day Switzerland, but rather continues straight northward to the lesser river of Saône. Therefrom we'll jump northwestward in our pursuit for a northern border to along the Meuse River. And further yet, as we reach modern-day Belgium, we'll jump from the Meuse River to the Somme River. Simply after that we'll stretch the HRE over the Benelux region, and we have the natural borders of the First German Reich. And by God do they look ugly. Moving on to the Second Reich in vain hopes of a more beautiful border. The Reich of the Wilhelms and Friedrich for a time, that is. For this let us go a bit more chronologically, meaning that we'll start in 1871 with the unification of Germany. Now for the most part, the borders of this Germany, while rather linguistically reasonable, lack any natural defensibility to them. Major rivers and or mountains are mostly just outside the Germans' foreign borders or just a bit too far inside them. Of course the North Sea and the Baltic are nice natural limits, but those only make up so much of the north. So 'tis best we look towards securing the German borders with allies and or subjects surrounding them. As Germany fought no major wars against its neighbors from the time of its unification up to the Great War, let's move on to 1914. Well, actually 1921, at about the time Germany has secured its victory in the Great War, though it may end in German victory up to 3 years prior. Precise timelines do not interest me here, as borders are the topic of the day. We'll say the victory take from 4 to 5 years to exacerbate the expansionist sentiment in Germany. Post-war then Germany shall annex in Europe an Alsace from France, as well as the eastern bank of the Meuse from Belgium, so that its western border against France lay along the Meuse and Moselle rivers. In addition, and to the aims of securing Germany by surrounding it with subjects, Germany shall form puppet kingdoms in Belgium, Poland, Lithuania, the Baltics, Belarus and Ukraine. Austria-Hungary could go one of two ways. Either the more probable that the Germans support the Austrians to enough extent as to have the nation truly federalized and stay intact, or that they don't help enough and the nation collapses and Austria joins Germany. We shall suppose the latter. The original plans for the so-called Polish trip, annexing an area from northwest Poland about the size of Belgium and settling it with Germans, were scrapped in 1917 as the Kingdom of Poland was established to pretty much the borders of the Russian Congress Poland. Nevertheless, as the Polish trip was ever such a beautiful idea and as it mimics the borders of the Third Polish Partition, let us suppose it eventually happened, for example in 1928, as the Poles finally elect to choose a king, namely the successor of the by then recently late Wilhelm Karl, that is Karl Gero, or rather Mindaugas III, King of Lithuania. Cue Polish-Lithuanian enmity with Germany, a cutting off of the German subjects in Eastern Europe via land, yada yada. The Germans invade and subjugate both Lithuania and Poland anew, instilling yet more favorable government and annexing the lands of the planned Polish partition as well as this awkward bit of the former Congress Poland, to separate the two nations from one another, eliminating any notions of a future threat. Anyhow, come the 30s or 40s, another great war erupts. It's inevitable after all. And would you look at that, the Germans win it again. No further annexations are made, but Germany forms more puppet kingdoms across the Caucasus, expands its current ones, and draws in the Nordics, the Netherlands and the Balkan into its fold in alliance during the war. Following the war, the broken France is coerced into German cooperation through one way or another. In a gist, the Germans don't expand much from our earlier linguistic borders, and less from our HRE borders, but they hold dominion over all of Europe in being the center of whatever form the replacement of the EU, Mitteleuropa, takes. Anyhow, the Third Reich. With the extremism of Nazism, the whole idea of irredentism sort of evaporates. The Nazis famously not only had aspirations of uniting all of the greater Germanic peoples into the Reich, but also to expand the population distribution of that people all the way up to the Urals. I suppose that's enough presentation of Third Reich territorial aims and naturality, but let us, for the sake of video length if nothing else, present a quasi-realistic quasi-timeline. Nothing to the ridiculous extent of Man in the High Castle, though. Beginning in 1935, the newly risen to power Nazi Germany finally annexes Saarland, or rather the mandate of silent votes in a referendum to rejoin Germany. But about a year later the Germans remilitarized the Rhineland and the Allies let it slide. Come 1938, the Austrians vote to join Germany in a rigged election. The increasingly bold Führer now dares to challenge the West more directly, demanding the joining of the Sudetenland to the Reich. The Allies appease the Germans to keep peace between the nations of Germany and of Czechoslovakia, but the Germans go back on their word, occupying Bohemia but months later and puppeting Slovakia. There ain't the peacetime and interwar expansions of Germany, as they next play the supposed ultimatum on Poland leads to war. Swiftly the Germans conquer, with the Soviets, the Poles, and a phony war rages for the better part of a year. Come summer 1940 though, the Germans execute Operation Weserübung and Fallgeld, and Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg and France fall to German occupation. Here the Germans formally annex from Poland the regions which they organize into Reichsgau Wartheland, Reichsgau Danzig Westpreußen, Regierungsbezirk Katowice and Regierungsbezirk Zichenau. In addition, the rest of German Poland becomes the general government, a separate administrative unit from the rest of Germany but still kind of a part of the nation. It's all very confusing. A certain autonomous zone that is. From Denmark, supposing an altered course of events where the Danes don't surrender to the Germans immediately, the Germans annex the northern part of Schleswig to the borders before the Great War. As for Belgium, the Germans re-annex Eupen Malmedy. In addition, the Germans annex the whole of Luxembourg as well as re-annex Alsace-Lorraine, while occupying and creating more favorable governments in the nations of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway and Denmark. Before hopping off to fight the Soviets, the Germans secure the Balkans to redraw some Axis borders therein. Relevantly for us, the Germans annex northern Slovenia. The Germans hop off over the border with the Soviet Union and triumph at each step of their war effort. In 1941, the Germans expand the General Government into eastern Galicia in modern-day Ukraine and annex the Bialystok district in modern-day eastern Poland, southern Lithuania and western Belarus. By the end of 1941, the Germans formed the puppet nations of the Reichskommissariats, of Ostland and of Ukraine. They are not directly part of the Reich but are pretty much colonies of it. By 1943, the Germans established Reichskommissariat Moscovian, by 1941 Caucasian, and by 1946 Volga. We'll say that by 1950 victory is declared as the Soviet resistance stalls to pretty much nothing at around the Urals, and the Germans can't handle the logistics strain of further conquest. At around 1943 the British make peace with the Germans and German dominion over continental Europe is secured. With the peace the extensive German occupation of Western Europe is lessened. Nevertheless, more favorable governments remain in all of the nations formerly occupied by the Germans. Benelux as well as Denmark and Norway are formalized as Reichskommissariats and planned for annexation. And so, having secured their dominion in Europe, the Germans begin to annex the Western Reichskommissariats. In 1945 the Germans annex Belgium, and in 1946 they annex the Netherlands. Come, say, 1948, the French revolt and war erupts between them and the Germans. The French lose, obviously. It is to our aims. The Germans annex the lands north and west of the Somme, Meuse and Moselle rivers. The best approximation of natural borders are joined to our aims. Further on over the 50s the Germans annex first Denmark, then Norway, then Sweden, which surely eventually has fallen into the German fold. In addition, Böhmen, Mähren and the General Government are more formally annexed and incorporated into the Reich, as the Slavic populations become the minority in resettling or in direct genocide or in indirect genocide, in slavery and or miserable conditions leading to their death. During the 50s it's very presumable that some disagreements emerge between Germany and the rest of the Axis powers, much like with the revolts in the Eastern Bloc of our timeline. And the Germans put the revolts down, annexing small territories from the revolted nations and putting more favorable puppet governments in charge. As for Italy, Germany annexes the areas it directly administered as the operational zones of Alpenvorland and Adriatisches Küstenland in our timeline from 1943 to 1945. As for Romania, Transnistria is presumably transferred to the Reichskommissariat Ukraine. Over the latter half of the 20th century, the Germans annex European Russia in stages, after local populations have been replaced with Germans or whatever Aryan peoples agreed to settle the region. The first planned regions of resettlement, at least per the Generalplan Ost, were the Memel-Nareveria from Bialystok to Courland, the greater region of Ingria, as well as the Goth district from the Crimean Peninsula to halfway up the Dnieper River. These are probably annexed in roughly that order from the Reichskommissariats which control them, though I'd imagine that after Memel, Nareva and Ingria are annexed, the Germans would want to annex Estonia as well, secure the Reich's borders better. Having annexed the Goth region, the next regions of the eastern Reichskommissariats begin to be settled to be annexed later. To connect the Goth district to Germany, the Germans resettle and annex western Ukraine, then Belarus. Eastern Ukraine and the greater region of Moscow rather quickly follow suit, after which settlement is focused on around the Volga in Reichskommissariat Volga, as well as in the north of the Caucasus. Very optimistically said, by 2000 or so the Germans annex all of European Russia up to the Urals. To the east of that lay Reichskommissariat Ural, and to the east of that the military occupation zone within Siberian Russia. Therewith come the natural borders of the Third Reich, from the Atlantic to the Urals, and thereat I shall end this video.